we are going live then.
Bienvenidos a todos. Mi
So,
nombre es
welcome
Ricardo
everyone.
Cantú.
I
Soy
am
profesor
Dario
y rector
Cantu, professor
ejecutivo
and executive
del
director
Instituto Chile
for
Center aquí en Santiago.
US Davis
Ah,
Chile here in Santiago.
Bienvenidos a todos los
Welcome
asistentes y
everyone
quienes nos
to
acompañan
the
hoy en esta
participants
segunda
and those
sesión
who
de
join us
Sustainable
in
Groundwater
our
Management
second
en el
session
propósito
of
propósito
sustainable
del 2021.
groundwater management
En este
of
seminario
the
vamos a
initiative
escuchar un intercambio
2001.
de
In this
experiencias, ideas
seminar,
y
we will see an exchange
reconocimientos
of experiences and ideas between our
internacionales.
panelists and international
Desde
guests.
UC Chile estamos muy
From
contentos de haber
UC
podido
Davis Chile,
convocar
we are
nuevamente a
happy
diversos
to have
actores y
brought again
protagonistas
different
de la
actors and
gestión hídrica en
protagonists
California y Chile,
in
que nos
water
permitirá tener una
management of
visión de
Chile
los
and
diferentes
California
aspectos y
so that we could
oportunidades
see the gaps
sectoriales.
of certain sectorial
La
opportunities.
iniciativa tiene
This
como
initiative
objetivo,
has
como
many
objetivo
goals,
principal el poder
but the
ofrecer a
main
los
goal
diversos
is to
actores del
offer
mercado chileno
different actors
experiencias,
in the
avances,
Chilean
desafíos,
market
conocimientos y
experiences,
toda la información
advances, and
de su
challenges
red de
of the
entidades públicas y
Californian
privadas
state
que
and
han
its
trabajado
network, both
conjuntamente para
public and
gestionar de
private,
mejor
that will
forma
work
el uso y la
jointly
gestión hídrica
to
en
better
sus diversas condiciones.
manage water resources under
UC
their
Davis Chile es también parte del consorcio
Davis
de
Chile is
gestión de
part of
recursos
the
hídricos de la
consortium of
macrozona
water
centro-sur de Chile.
management
Y entre sus
of the
principales
macro south of
aportes
Chile. And among their
cumplimos
main
con
support, we
espacios de
have
conocimiento y
contributing
mirada
with a
global
space of
hacia las
knowledge
nuevas tendencias
and
de la
global
gestión
view
hídrica,
towards new
liderada por una
trends
visión
in water
sustentable,
management
comunitaria
with a
y
sustainable community and
medioambientalmente responsable
environmental
desde
point
California
of
y el
view
ecosistema de la
from
Universidad de
California
California System.
and the ecosystem
Existe un
of the
interés
University
real
of
de
California
funcionalidad
system.
en extender el
So
conocimiento
these
humano
activities
y
has as a
avances en
goal to
California
place
en
advances
materias de medio
from
ambiente,
California in
infraestructura,
issues of
gestiones
environment,
hídricas y
water
aguas
management,
subterráneas,
basin management, and
sistema de
subterranean
monitoreo, sequía, incendios
monitoring
y
systems,
el
drought
cuidado del
systems,
agua, entre
fires,
otros.
and the care for water among.
Quisiéramos partir
I
agradeciendo a
would
nuestro
like to
partner
start
en este
by
evento,
thanking our
que es
partner in the
Capta
event,
Hydro,
which is Capta
y a
Hydro,
las organizaciones que nos
also
apoyan,
the
como la Embajada de
organizations that
los Estados
support
Unidos,
us, like the Embassy of the
USDA,
US,
the United States
the
Department of Agriculture,
USDA,
Andes
the
Chile, la
and the
Asociación
Chile
Territorial
Group,
de Riego,
the Syndicate
el Consorcio
Association,
Tecnológico de Agua,
the
Fondo
Technological
Chile
Water
Lagos Limpios,
Consortium,
Ministerio de
Chile
Obras
Lagos
Públicas,
Limpios Foundation,
Dirección
Ministry of Public
General de
Works,
Aguas, Ministerio de
General
Agricultura, la Comisión
Works
Nacional de Riego,
Ministry,
Corfo
the
y la
National
Agencia
Irrigation
Nacional de
Council,
Investigación
CORFO,
Ambiental.
and the National Agency for
Y también a nuestro
National
partner digital
Development,
como
and
Centrum
also
Evento,
our
Convenciones y
digital
Exposiciones
partner
Virtuales.
like Centrum Events.
Les quería recordar que
I want
contamos
to
con
remind you that we have
interpretación simultánea al inglés
simultaneous
y al español,
interpretation into
al
English
que
and
pueden
Spanish
acceder
available, which
los usuarios
access,
haciendo clic en el
users
botoncito
can
que se
access with a
encuentra
click at the
disponible en
bottom
la sala
button that is
virtual.
found available in the virtual.
Les recuerdo que nos pueden
I
encontrar en redes
remind you that
sociales
you
como
can
Instituto
find
Chile.
us
Y sin
on social
mayor preámbulo,
networks
dejo con ustedes a
like
María Emilia Undurraga,
USCDV,
ministra de
Chile
Agricultura,
Review,
quien iniciará la
Maria
sesión de hoy.
Braga, the Minister of Agriculture, who will
Muchas gracias,
session today.
Darío.
Thank you, Dario. Thank you very
Muchas
much.
gracias a todo el
Thank you
equipo
to
de
everyone
UC
on the
Davis
team,
Chile que ha
the UC Davis
organizado
Chile
esta
team that has
sesión.
organized this
Usted sabe
seminar,
que se
this summit,
marcamos en este
which
ciclo
is
de
what
charlas.
marks the cycle of
Quisiera
three
saludar también a
talks.
quienes
I
nos
would like
acompañan
to
hoy
also
día, a
greet
Samuel,
those
a
whom
Desiree, a
share
Jenny,
with us,
todos
Samuel,
quienes han sido parte
Jay, and
de este
all who have
proceso.
been
Muchas
part of
veces
the
esto es como
process.
la punta del
Often,
iceberg. Uno
this is
ve el
like the
elemento
iceberg
final
question. You see the
donde se
final
llegan a
event
las conclusiones
and
y ya
product
se han
where
analizado
conclusions are
distintos
seen
temas, pero
and different
todo se
subjects
empieza
are
a
analyzed,
preparar
but
y todo
everything
lo que significa
meaning prepare,
acordar con todos los
preparation,
participantes
and agreeing with all
este summit se
participants.
agradece
This
desde ya.
summit we appreciate
Quisiera
greatly from
como
now.
parte
I
de
would
mis
like to,
palabras
as part of these
entregar
words,
un contexto
to give
general
a more
de
general
un que
context,
a posterior
a
van a poder
product that
conversar con los
then
verdaderos
you will be able to
especialistas
talk with the true
del agua,
specialists in water,
de las cuencas del agua
of
superficial y del agua
basins and superficial water, and
subterránea.
specifically
Y quisiera
subterranean
en este
sources. I
contexto
would like in this
compartir
context
este
thus to
desafío
share
global, que no es
this
solamente
global
cómo hacemos
challenge,
un
which is
mejor
not
manejo
only
del agua,
how we do
sino
better
cómo en
use
este
of water,
contexto
but how in this
desde
context,
eh,
from
de desafíos más macro, como lo es la
a
seguridad
more macro
alimentaria,
challenge like
cómo
food safety,
alimentamos a la
how
población
we
de
also
alimentos
the
cada
rest
vez
of the world
con un
population
ambiente más
with
tensionado
a
y que
more
requiere ser
tensed environment
incorporado
that
en
requires
la forma de
to be
producción.
incorporated
Y
in
no
the
solamente
forms of
vinculamos el
production.
agua
And we
con
only
la
don't
producción de
also
alimentos, sino que
only
cómo
not
el
only
agua
link
se
water with food
vincula
production,
con
but how
la calidad de
water
vida, especialmente en
is
las zonas
linked to
rurales,
quality
en
of
muchas
life,
comunidades que tienen
rural
aún
world, because there are many
acceso
communities
al
that still
agua
have many
y
gaps
también en este
in
contexto del
water
cambio climático,
access and also climate
producto de este cambio
that due
climático
to the climate change
Estas posturas han
context,
cambiado y
conditions of
requerimos
production have changed,
considerarlas para
and we
asegurar
need to
el flujo
consider them
natural
for
de lo que
a more
estamos
general
viviendo.
analysis of what we are living.
Y con la agricultura hemos querido impulsar
We've
un
wished
cambio de
thus to
mirada no
stimulate a
solo en la alimentación,
view change
en el
with
cuidado del
focus
bosque
on
y en el
feeding
desarrollo rural,
and
de
care
tal
of the
forma que
forest and
salimos
developing
exclusivamente de
technologies.
los
Thus, we
límites de los predios
exclusively
y
are
los
able to
campos y
leave the limits of
ampliamos
the
el
fields
ámbito de
and
acción
farms and
y
are able
llegamos
to broaden
finalmente a nuestros
our level
consumidores
of action and are able
el
to reach
impacto
final
real que
users
tiene la
with true
agricultura,
impact
no
that
solamente como
agriculture
producto
can offer us,
económico,
not only as
sino
an
para
economic
generar un
activity,
impacto
but with an
social
activity
y
with
ambiental.
social and
¿Por qué?
environmental
Porque hemos querido
impact.
y
Why?
recalcamos cada vez que
Because
podemos,
we note
nosotros como
as long
sector
as we
agrícola
can,
no solo
we are
producimos,
not
sino que
only a
trabajamos.
productive
Y eso
agricultural
lo
system, but
compartimos
also
con el
food
Estado de
production, and we
California
share
y
it
queremos
with
reforzar ese
the
aspecto,
state of
porque los
California. And we
agricultores
wish to reinforce
históricamente
this
se han
because
quedado internamente
farmers
en los
have
predios, en los campos,
eternally stuck
enfocados en su
in the
producción
fields,
y no hemos
focused
salido
only on their
a decir
production, and
con
we haven't been
fuerza
able to go
que
out with
gracias al
strength
trabajo
and say
largo
that
de ellos
thanks to
en
everyone's
los
work
rincones del mundo
and
rural, en
the
los distintos
corners
países
of
del
the
mundo, es
rural
que
world of the
tantas
different
familias
countries of the
de
world,
las grandes
that
ciudades y
families
pequeños
of
pueblos
large
pueden
cities and
alimentarse a
small
diario. Y también sabemos
towns
las
can
cifras
feed themselves.
actuales
Also know that the
de
current
inseguridad
figures
alimentaria.
of food
Actualmente tenemos cerca de
unsafety or
800 millones
insecurity,
de
we have
personas
almost 800
que
million
viven con
people
hambre
that live
y
in
la otra
hunger,
cara de la moneda,
and the other
700
face of
millones
the
de
coin,
personas
700
que
million people,
tienen condición de
which have
obesidad. Ambas
obesity conditions.
situaciones muy
Both
relevantes para cuando
very
hablamos
relevant
de
situations
agricultura y en
of
este caso
agriculture,
particular de
and in
agua
this
para
particular
producir
case,
alimentos.
of water to
¿Por qué?
produce food.
Porque esa alimentación
Why? Because
vamos a tener
this
que producirla de
food will
forma
have to be produced
ambientalmente sostenible
in
y
a
económicamente rentable y
sustainably,
socialmente
environmentally
responsable,
sustainable
con menos
fashion
agua, y ese es
and
el
with
punto que
social
nos une hoy día,
responsibility, with
pero
less
también con
water,
menos suelo,
which is the point
pero
that brings us
siendo
together,
sumamente
but also with
productiva.
less
Por
soil,
eso
but also with
la
more.
conversación no
That
solamente
is
es
why
una
the
política
conversation, not
pública,
only
y aquí vuelvo
policy, and
a
here I
mencionar y
go back
playar la
to
voz que tiene
mention the
Lucinda
great
Smith en
job of
vincular al sector
Davis
público y
in
privado y la
connecting
sociedad civil en
public-private
pos de este
sector and
reto
civil
no tan global.
society in the more global
No quiero dar
challenges that
detalles
we
de
face.
la
I do not want to
estrategia,
give
sino
too
más
much
bien
detail of the
quiero
strategy,
enmarcar
but
este
I also
seminario
wish to
en
mark
torno de lo
this
que ha sido la estrategia del
seminar
Ministerio de
specifically
Agricultura
in the
en
Ministry of
torno a esta
Agriculture's
sustentabilidad,
strategy,
que
with
no
it's
solamente es
such a broad
sectorial,
view
sino que es
that is not only
sustentable, no
sectorial but
solamente de exigir,
sustainable,
sino que de
and not only to
alimentar,
reduce
no
but to feed,
solamente de un
not only
esfuerzo individual,
of an
sino que de una
individual effort,
sociabilidad
but of
necesaria para poder enfrentar esta crisis.
necessary
Y el otro
society to face
elemento
challenge. And our second
estratégico es
axis
sin
of the
duda la
strategy
producción
is without a
sustentable, el
doubt
cambio climático,
sustainable
pero
production,
especial
climate change,
enfoque en
and
el agua.
special
Y así
focus
como
upon
decimos que no
water.
producimos
And
ni
thus,
alimentamos,
as we say, we
también
don't
cuando
produce, but
hablamos
we
de agua decimos lo que
also
no
speak of
necesitamos es
water.
agua para
We
la
say we don't
agricultura,
need
ni
just
agua
water
para
for
los
agriculture
agricultores, sino que
nor water
necesitamos
for
agua
farmers,
para
but we need
producir
water
alimentos
to
de
produce
toda la sociedad, de todas las
the
familias,
food for all
independientemente de
society and all
dónde
families,
provengan,
independent
dónde estén
of where
viviendo.
they may come
¿Y
and
por
where
qué
they live.
articulamos en estos ejes?
This
Porque
along
este
these
análisis del
axes,
agua no
because
puede
this water
desvincularse con lo
analysis
que
can't
ocurre
be
con la
unlinked
calidad de vida del mundo
to what's
rural,
happening
con
with
lo que
the quality
ocurre
of life
en
of
la
the world
producción de
or
alimentos,
what's
en las
happening in
formas que
food
tenemos para
production,
poder
in the way that we
relacionarnos, para
have
poder
to associate
enfrentar estos
ourselves and
desafíos y
face these
finalmente
challenges.
con
And
la
finally,
modernización,
because the
innovación
modernization
permanentes,
and
sumarnos a
innovation
las nuevas tecnologías
allows
y
to
poder
consider new
nos permite
technologies
adaptarnos a estos
and allow us
desafíos
to adapt to these
que
challenges,
sin duda concordamos
which
todos
without
los
a
que estamos
doubt we
presentes
all
acá.
agree whom are
Y
present here
para
today
ninguno
with
no
us.
es una
Why?
sorpresa estos datos.
Because
Me
for
imagino
now,
que ya los
one,
han
it's a
analizado
surprise.
con mayor
I
profundidad. Yo
think
solamente
we've been
quise
able to
traer
analyze
uno de
this
los
in
datos
more in
para
depth.
dar
I just wanted
cuenta
to present
de la
one
escasez
data
hídrica que estamos
to
viviendo.
show
Una
of
escasez
the
hídrica que no
water
solamente
scarcity that we
es
are living,
producto de las bajas
scarcity that
precipitaciones,
is not only a
además de las
product of
bajas
dropping of a drop of
precipitaciones, tiene una
precipitations,
baja
but
en
also
caudal,
include a
tiene
drop in
acumulación de nieve y por
river
ende una
flow in
situación que
snowfall
estresa
accumulation, and
profundamente
thus it is a situation that deeply
para gran
stresses
parte de nuestros
great
países.
part
No
of our
voy a dar
country.
detalles
I won't give
porque
much detail
la
because
presentación se
I
hace
can
longitudinal. Yo
share
quería más
the
que nada
presentation
dar
if you want, but I
contexto
just
de
wish
que
to give a
esta
context
situación hídrica
because
afecta a las
this water
vegetaciones de
situation
forma
affects
importante
vegetation
cada región.
importantly in
Este es
each
un
of the
indicador
regions.
que mide la
This is
sequía
an
de
indicator
vegetación
that
y de cómo a
measures
medida medida que van pasando los meses,
ve-
vemos ya
vegetational drought and
diferentes
how
regiones con
we see in the majority of the regions with
y
a
aquí
lot of stressed vegetation.
la
And
alarma
here we
roja,
see
podemos ver
in red
que
an alarm
actualmente en
that
Chile, en
currently
nuestra
in
secretaría,
Chile,
tenemos varias
due to these
regiones
situations,
en
we have
emergencia agrícola
several
por déficit
issues,
hídrico.
several regions with
Y
agricultural
es lo que les comentaba, esta
a lack
situación
of water.
de
And this is
crisis
the
hídrica,
situation that I
que
commented
dejó de
of
ser una emergencia
water
y pasó
scarcity
a ser
that
un
stopped
cambio
being an
estructural,
emergency
porque
and
llevamos
became
13
a
años de una
structural
sequía
change
constante,
because
lo que ha
we've been
producido
13
un
years
impacto
of
no solamente
constant
en
drought that
cada
has
una de las
produced an
temporadas,
impact
sino que es
not
un
only
impacto
in
que se
each
va
of the seasons,
acumulando
but
y una
impact that will be
necesidad por
accumulated
parte de los
and a
distintos
need
actores,
on behalf
públicos,
of the
privados,
different
sociedad civil,
sectors,
de enfrentar
public,
este
private, and
desafío
civil
con forma
society, to
distinta.
face these
No podemos
challenges in a different way.
medidas
We
para
can't have
cubrir una
just
emergencia, tenemos
measures
que
to cover an
tener
emergency, but
medidas
we have to
de
have
ajuste, de
measures
cambios
that
estructurales que nos
produce
permitan
the structural
adaptarnos a
changes
esta
that
nueva
allow
realidad.
us to adapt
Y
to the
esto
new
ha hecho
reality.
que como
And this
gobierno
has made it that
hayamos
as
lanzado
government,
un plan
we've
sequía, un plan de sequía
launched a
que
drought
simplemente
plan,
pudiese serse
which
visto
in
como un plan
simple
de
view
emergencia,
can be
pero que
seen as an
va
emergency
mucho más
plan,
allá que un plan de
but is
emergencia.
further
Se
than just
inicia
simple
con
emergency plan.
una
It is started
definición
with
distinta de
a
cómo
different
enfrentamos el
definition of
desafío
how
del
we
agua.
face
Y este
the issue
plan
at
de
hand.
sequía
And this
incluye, por
plan
ejemplo,
against
el plan de
drought
gestión de
includes
cuencas, que me
the
imagino que
basin
pueden revisar
management plan that I think
con mayor
I'll
profundidad
review
esta
more in
iniciativa
depth
del Ministerio de Obras
this
Públicas,
initiative of the
que por
Ministry
primera
of
vez en nuestro
Public
país
Works that for first time in our country
evalúa y
that
analiza la
evaluates
situación
and
de las
analyze the
cuencas de las
situation
101 cuencas
of
del país.
the
Entonces,
101
se
basins
da
of the
cuenta
country.
de las
It is a
101 cuencas.
process
Hoy día
of the
estamos más o menos
state of
70
the
cuencas del país,
101 basins.
¿ya?
We are at
De
70
la
today
zona
of the
centro del
main
país.
basins of
Pero
the
tener
central regions of the
información
country.
de la
But to have
oferta y demanda del
information of
agua
the
de cada
offer
una de
and
las cuencas
demand and
es
water of each of
fundamental.
the
Y
basins
eso
is fundamental.
incluye el agua subterránea, que es
This
el tema que
includes
hoy día nos
subterranean water,
convoca.
which is the
Pero hemos
subject that
logrado
brings us together.
anteriormente,
Since
no
we've
solamente
mentioned as
tenemos que
previously, we
adaptarnos
not only
con
have to adapt
instrumentos o políticas,
with
tenemos que modernizar
our
y
instruments and
fortalecer el
politics, we
marco
have to
institucional.
strengthen
El agua
institutional
dejó de ser un
framework.
elemento
I
abundante y pasó
It
a ser
stopped
más
being
bien
an
un
abundant
elemento
element
escaso
and
y por eso
became
como
a
gobierno
scarce
y
element. And thus,
administración
as
pública,
ministry
también
and
como
public
comunidad y
entity,
sociedad
and
civil,
also
tenemos
as
que
public
enfrentarnos a esta
sector and civil
situación
society,
de
we have
forma
to
distinta.
face the
Y para
situation in a
poder
different
enfrentar esto
fashion.
necesitamos
And to
investigación,
face this, we
necesitamos
need
vincularnos y ahí en el
investigation, we
plan de
need to
sequía hemos
relate. And
visto que
in
tenemos
this drought
fondos
plan,
para
we've
proyectos
seen that we
que
have
nos
funds for
permitan
projects
avanzar
that allow us
en
to
ese sentido.
advance
Y
in
después
this
tenemos
sense.
distintas
And we
medidas
also
que
have
están
different,
relacionadas.
which are
Una, que es la que
related.
está en
One,
verde, con el agua para los
it's in
alimentos, cómo
green,
vamos
which is water
dando
for
esta seguridad
of
alimentaria
how
para poder
we
continuar
can
produciendo los
ensure
alimentos
water
y cómo
guarantee to
vamos
ensure
explorando nuevas
food
fuentes como
production
la
and how to
irrigación, por
explore
ejemplo, cómo
new
vamos también dando cuenta
sources
de las
like
necesidades de abastecimiento
desalinization
rural, cómo
or
vamos
rural
estableciendo un
drinking
buen
water
uso
needs,
del agua en
or
las
how to
ciudades
improve the
para
use of
poder
water in the
reutilizalas,
cities
por
to
ejemplo,
be able
y
to
reducir
reuse them
este
and
consumo y
decrease
sin dejar de
its full
lado el
consumption
cuidado del
and
medio
without
ambiente.
leaving
El agua es
aside
fundamental para
ecosystem
el cuidado
care.
humano,
Water
es
is
fundamental
fundamental
para
for
producir
human being
alimentos, es fundamental
consumption,
para muchas
for food
actividades económicas
production,
y, por
and
supuesto,
many
también
economic
para el cuidado
activities,
del
and also
ecosistema.
for
El entender
ecosystem
esta
care and
integralidad de las
understanding
funciones del agua
this
en las
comprehensive
políticas y en cambio
integralness
cuando estamos
in the
en una sequía
policies
es
when we
fundamental.
face a drought,
Y para ello,
very
desde el
fundamental.
Ministerio de Agricultura
And
hemos
from
conformado
the
no
Ministry
solamente
of Agriculture,
participando en la
we've
Mesa
made up
Nacional del
and
Agua con los
not only
distintos actores,
participate in
sino
the
que hemos
National Water
conformado la
Table with
Mesa del
different
Agua para la
stakeholders,
Agricultura,
but we made
entendiendo el
the
rol
water
fundamental
table
que
for
tiene
agriculture, understanding
el
water's
rol de la
fundamental
agricultura
role,
en el uso del
sorry,
agua. El
agriculture
70% del agua, cerca del
use of
70%
water.
del agua
70% of
de nuestro
water
país se utiliza
used
para
in our country
transformarla
is
en
used to
alimentos.
transform
Y
it
por
into
eso las
food.
acciones del
And that is
Ministerio de
why
Agricultura
the
son muy
Ministry of
importantes para
Agriculture's
incorporar
actions
en esta
are important
estrategia
to
que
incorporate
es
into the
país, no es
strategy
sectorial, sino que es
where
país,
it
y
is
que
not
requiere
sectorial
avanzar
but
en
country, but it
distintos ejes.
requires
Y es lo que
to
estamos
advance
haciendo en
different
la Mesa del
axes. And
Agua
this
para
is what
quienes
we're
estén
doing at the water
interesados
table for
en
those
materiales,
interested
pueden
in
acercarse al Ministerio de Agricultura
where we could get closer to the
para poder conocer
Ministry of
las acciones
Agriculture to
público-privadas de la
know
sociedad civil. Esta es
public
una mesa que
private
une
actions of civil
a
society.
todos
This
los
is the
sectores
table that
para
brings all
avanzar
sectors
tanto en
together
el eje de demanda y
to advance
eficiencia
both in
en
the
la
efficiency
producción,
and demand
en la
access in
disponibilidad,
management,
en
in availability, in water quality that often we are delayed in the discussion, and of course, we have also the conservation and basin management, and transversally to communicate, to be able to have information, with training and with coordination. For this, it becomes fundamental.
Solo para ir terminando ya para
Just to
ir a
finish
la zona
and to
específica
begin going
de
to the
aguas
specific
subterráneas,
issue of subterranean
SEA
water
se ha
management, that
avanzado
in this
tanto en temas de
agricultural
ayuda
water
en la
table,
participación de comunidades de aguas
we've
subterráneas
advanced in
como la
managing
información
subterranean
del
water
Programa
sources like
Nacional de Mejora
information
de
in
Acuíferos
the
y también la
National
identificación de sitios para embalses
Aquifer
subterráneos, por
Reload Program
ejemplo,
and
la
also
fuente de
under
Anegua y Petorca como
subterranean
algunos ejemplos de esto.
basin refill like
¿Cuáles son los desafíos
the
que vemos
Aconcagua
nosotros
project,
desde
and what are the
distintas
challenges we
instancias
want from the
gubernamentales,
ministry and
público-privada,
have
del
made up in the
Ministerio de
public-private
Agricultura,
table from
con
the Ministry of
respecto a las aguas
Agriculture
subterráneas?
regarding
Creemos que
subterranean
debemos
water. We
impulsar
believe that we
el
must
acceso a
stimulate
nuevas
the
fuentes hídricas
study and
en el
access to
marco de
new
una gestión
water
sustentable a
sources in
través
the
de
under
instrumentos
the
de
framework of
alto
sustainable
uso.
management
Tenemos que
all of
contribuir
its
con
uses.
mejora de la
We must
administración de los
continue
recursos,
in improving
incluyendo y
resource
fortaleciendo a las
management,
comunidades de aguas
including
subterráneas
strengthening
con participación
subterranean
de los
water
agricultores y
communities
el
with
campesino,
participation
el
of the
desarrollo de la
family
regulación adecuada
farmers,
y
with
políticas
association
responsables
of
de
the
las prácticas
regulation
de
and
conservación de suelos y
reinforcing
aguas que permitan la
soil and
acumulación
water conservation
de
practices that allow
acumulación
the
subterránea.
accumulation of subterranean
Desde el
accumulation.
Ministerio de Agricultura estamos
From the
realizando
Ministry
muchísimas
of
iniciativas. Quizás la
Agriculture,
más
we're
importante
seeing many
es la
initiatives. Maybe the
promulgación de la
most
ley de
important
ríos.
is the
Es una
update
ley
of
que
the
tiene
irrigation
implicancias
law.
para los
It's a
acuíferos
law
de
that has
distintas,
implications for
distintos
underground
niveles,
sources and
incluyendo la
different
gestión de ellos.
sources,
Creemos
including
que
its
va a ser
management.
uno
And we
de los
believe
avances
one of
importantes que
the
vamos a
most
tener
important advances
en este
that we
tiempo,
will have in the
producto de
time,
la focalización de
a
los
product
recursos en las
of
familias poderosas
focusing
y en los
resources
pequeños.
on family
Eso es lo que
and
quería
small production.
entregarles como marco
That's
a
what I
través de
wanted
este
to offer as a
conversatorio,
framework
como una
and thank
instancia
the
de poder
instance as
colaborar
an
entre
instance for
países, agradecer
collaboration
a
between
UC
countries,
Davis
to thank UC
y a
Davis
todo el equipo en Chile
and
para
the
poder
rest of the
continuar
team
esta colaboración,
be able to
este
continue with this
aprendizaje conjunto en el
collaboration with
marco de este cambio
this
climático que nos ha
common
tensionado como países
subject that has
productores de alimentos a hacer un
tensioned
mejor
food
uso
producing
y un uso
countries
eficiente del
to
agua
do
que
an
cada vez es más
efficient, better
escasa.
use of water,
Esto
which is more and
requiere
more scarce,
adaptar nuestros
but
desafíos para
require
continuar
to adapt our
alimentando
challenges to
a las
continue to
familias y
feed people
continuar
and populations,
mejorando
to
la
continue
calidad de vida
improving
del entorno rural
quality of
y
life of
defendiendo
rural
el medio
surroundings
ambiente, es decir,
and
haciendo
to
un uso sustentable,
protect the environment,
permitiendo en
thus
conjunto
sustainable
con
use and
todos los
allowing
actores del
jointly with all of
territorio
the actors of
avanzar
the
en este
territory
desafío
to
que es global.
advance in
Muchas
the
gracias.
challenge. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, ministro,
Thank you
por su
very
participación
much
y por
for your
su
participation
apoyo a esta sesión.
and giving your
Muchas
support to
gracias.
this session.
Ahora dejo con ustedes
And
al
now
doctor
I leave you
Sam
with
Sandoval,
Dr. Sam
profesor del Departamento
Sandoval,
de Recursos del
professor of
Suelo,
the
Aire y
Department of
Agua y
Resources, Soil,
especialista
Air,
en
and Water,
Cooperación Cooperativa en
and
UC Davis.
specialist
Gracias,
at
Sam.
UC Davis. Thank you very much, Sam.
Hola, saludos a todos,
Hi, greeting everyone.
felices fiestas,
First
que
of
estén muy
all,
bien.
congratulations and hope you have a good
Darío
time
y Mariano dejaron
between
de lado
Dario
una
and
tortilla de
Mariano.
centeno,
They've left
que
the hot
es
potato
hacer la
here,
transferencia o lo que menciona
but
es hacer la
it's
transferencia de
to do the
modesto
transfer
intercambio de conocimiento,
of
experiencias y
modest
tecnología entre Chile y
knowledge,
California y bueno,
experience,
el
technology
dato
exchange
que nos
between
da esta María Emilia, ¿no? Que
Chile and
eh, 13 años de
California.
sequía, en California ya llevamos 10, ahí estamos
California,
compartidos. Lo
we have
mismo,
been sharing
la
here.
importancia del sector agrícola
So
para,
what's important is also the
bueno,
agricultural sector
producir
to help
alimento, ayudar a la
ourselves
sociedad
and
y luego
produce
la
food,
conservación del medio
help
ambiente.
society, and
Y aquí
environmental
es un
conservation.
estira y afloja, ¿no?
And
De
this is a
crecimiento
simple
económico y
tug of war
sin
between
sobreexplotación,
economic
¿no?
growth without over
Entonces, bueno, para esto sí
exploitation or
tenemos,
exportation. Thus,
como tú
for
lo
this, we
decías,
have
dos,
as
si
topic
estuvieron hablando de
headers,
béisbol,
if we
dos
were
cuartos bats,
speaking of
o si
baseball,
estuviéramos
so
hablando de
how many
fútbol,
bats?
dos nueve.
If we're talking of
Y
footballs,
se
we're
la
talking
saben
of
muy bien
two
en el concepto
nines.
del agua, ¿no?
For those who know and work with
El
water
primero
very well,
es,
the first
bueno, Jay
is
Long, un
thus
colega aquí de
Jay
UC
Long,
Davis,
a UC Davis
director
colleague,
del
whom
Watershed Science
the
Center,
director
de
of the
Conservación de
Watershed
Cuencas,
Time Center of
y profesor de
Basin
Ingeniería
Management
Civil y
and is
Medio Ambiente.
professor of civil
Jay,
engineering
adelante.
and environment. Jay, please, if you may. one life.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much, Sam, for the introduction. I'd like to give an overview today on groundwater and basin water management in California, particularly our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and some of its implications for the Chilean water management context. This is a very nice map developed by Professor Sebastian Vicuña from Chile on comparison of the situations of California and Chile. So here is California. It's one of the bigger states in the United States, the most populous one, and you'll notice that we have some fairly sizable rivers that run from north to south across the length. And this contrasts with Chile, which is a much longer country than we are a state. Covers a much wider north-south range, but is a bit thinner. And so all of California essentially fits in this box within Chile, in the center of Chile, with very similar kinds of latitudes, except that, of course, you're in the south and we're in the north. So we have similar weather, but the seasons are opposite. This has led to a lot of similarities in our agriculture and in our water management and many of our water situations, although you can see from the map that the topography is really quite different. We're really blessed in California with having these very large north-south flowing rivers that make it easier for us to move water between basins. So in California, much like most of Chile, most of our water is available in the mountainous areas, and we have very large desert areas and very dry areas, some of which have become important agricultural areas as we've moved water. The value of that water for agriculture in particular varies quite a bit. You can see in different parts of the state, major agricultural areas in the Central Valley and along the coast. Some places have very high values of water. An acre foot is about 1,200 cubic meters. And other places it's quite a bit less, depending upon the local climate and soils and the like. We have two major urban areas, the San Francisco Bay Area and then the much larger, more populous Los Angeles, San Diego area in the south. When you look at the sort of big mismatch we have for water availability and water demands, particularly for agriculture, but also for cities in California, what this has meant is that we've built quite a lot of infrastructure and we have quite a lot of water projects that move water both in space from wetter areas to drier areas, as well as moving them in time from the wet seasons to the dry seasons and from wet years to dry years, because we have quite long droughts here, just like you're seeing in Chile. And so this map on the left shows the variety of infrastructure that we've built to supplement our rivers and move water around. And we have quite a lot of reservoirs, of course, up in the mountains. A really important feature for our talk today is the very huge aquifers in the state, particularly this immense aquifer underneath the Central Valley. So if you have a top-down view of the water infrastructure in California, you see all the dams and canals. But in some ways more important at times is the bottom-up view of California's water infrastructure, which is the aquifers. So if you looked at the water infrastructure from the center of the earth looking out, as opposed to the top-down, you would see the aquifers, and you would see a tremendous water-bearing geologic strata in the Central Valley and then in all the other valleys throughout the state. The storage capacities for these are just immense. Groundwater has some really important roles in the California water system. First of all, it collects precipitation from streams and reuse. So it's a way of collecting water from a lot of places, because in order to manage water, you have to have it collected. It's a way of storing water, both seasonally between wet seasons and dry seasons, as well as between wet years and dry years, so for droughts. And then also it's a way of storing water to be mined, essentially, almost as a liquid mineral. We've overdrafted quite a lot of the water in some parts of the state, but it has provided quite a lot of economic benefit for that mining, just like you would mine any other mineral. Groundwater also conveys water, so it gathers up water and then it conveys water to local pumps. Groundwater also serves, unfortunately, as a drain, as a sink for water, so that agricultural lands do not become waterlogged, as a destination for salts and nitrate and other contaminants, yeah, in agricultural areas, but also for some in urban areas. And then groundwater is also very important to support riparian and wetland ecosystems that are tremendously important in California. Just to give you a sense to contrast the surface water system and the groundwater system in California in terms of billions of cubic meters, we have much greater storage capacity in groundwater. Certainly the surface water operates differently in terms of storage than groundwater, but in terms of raw capacity, we have much more storage capacity, drought storage capacity in particular from groundwater. In terms of its usage, we tend to use surface water more as seasonal storage from wet seasons to dry seasons than we do for groundwater, but groundwater is still quite important. For drought storage, we use quite a lot of surface water, but we tend to use a bit more groundwater in terms of billions of cubic meters of drawdown during major droughts. And in terms of water deliveries, probably 60 to 70% of our normal water use comes from surface water and 30 to 40% is from groundwater. But even though we have more storage from groundwater, potentially at least. California is a very big state with very diverse water uses and water demands and very diverse hydrologies, almost as diverse as Chile's. And so we have quite a few different groundwater problems. Probably the major one we talk about is overdraft, where some parts of the state have tremendous amounts of groundwater use that exceed the recharge to groundwater. This causes lots of cost problems and quality problems, and eventually water availability problems, and particularly for rural areas, the drying up of many rural wells. We have some water rights insecurity in terms of water banks and farmers and cities and water markets. Water markets have been very useful in California for civilizing the reliability of water supplies for some folks and allowing people to be compensated for giving up some of their lower economic value water uses for higher value uses and the jobs that they bring. We have some problems with groundwater use essentially encroaching on surface water rights. If you pump too much groundwater, that groundwater is replenished in part by water draining from streams. And that water that drains from streams to replenish lower groundwater tables is water that's not available for some of the water right holders downstream. So this has been some considerable interference with surface water right holders in some places. We have some water quality insecurity and costs in terms of nitrate pollution and other kinds of contaminants. We have accumulations of nitrate, salts, and other contaminants from irrigation that have been quite a problem in rural areas and pose some very substantial threats to agriculture as well in the long term. In many places, some places we have pumped so much groundwater, lowered the groundwater table enough that the land level has subsided as we've seen compaction, particularly in clay layers. This has led to some flood problems and some canal problems. So when you when you have land subsidence, you will also change the gradients and on the surface water canals. And so some of our surface water delivery systems have now much reduced capacities to move surface water because of some land subsidence from groundwater use. Increased aquifer pumping has also caused more problems for environmental flows. Um, and more requirements for environmental flows have reduced surface water available for agriculture. And so some of the farmers have been pumping more groundwater that have increased some of the groundwater problems. As I mentioned before, many of our wetlands and streams are dependent upon groundwater to have low base flows during the dry periods. And so the depletion of groundwater has led to some important ecosystem problems. As the climate is changing, we're seeing substantially greater variability, both seasonally within a year and then between wet years and dry years. So climate change is going to be an important part of both this problem and solutions, I think. All of these problems vary a lot locally, from location to location within the state, just as they do in Chile, and over time, between seasons and between wet years and dry years in particular. Groundwater overdraft is on the order of about 2.5 billion cubic meters per year. It's about 15% of net water use, particularly for agriculture in these regions. Most of the problem is in the Tulare Basin and the southern part of our Central Valley. But you can see most of the state is doing fine for groundwater overdraft, but the overdraft in the Tulare Basin is really quite amazing. In 2014, during our previous drought, we're in another drought now. Eventually, the state of California passed a law called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This law requires the ending of groundwater overdraft in all the major basins by the year 2014. The law requires that local areas form groundwater sustainability agencies, and that these locally led groundwater sustainability agencies must develop groundwater sustainability plans and implement them by the year 2040 to end groundwater overdraft by 2040. So many of these plans are already in existence or being reviewed. It will take some time for them to become implemented, but we're looking forward to that. If the local plans are not sufficient or not effective, then the state has the option of coming in and taking over the management of that groundwater basin. And of course, there's nothing more fearful than to local water managers than to have the state come in and take over your basin. So there's kind of a sort of Damocles over these basins. In order to eliminate this amount of overdraft, we're probably going to fallow probably between 200 and 400,000 hectares of irrigated land in the state. So that's really quite a lot of agriculture. Here's a map of the priority basins, the darker orange ones, and you can see they're throughout the southern part of the Central Valley and quite a few other places, but by no means all aquifers in the state. This need to manage the groundwater in these basins is really going to force us to have much more regional water management as a whole. So in order to manage groundwater well, you have to manage surface water well, and you have to manage water demands well. And that's going to force us, I think, to have greater basin scale water management in order to solve some of the groundwater problems. In managing groundwater, we only have a few options. We can increase recharge, which everybody loves to talk about. Fewer people want to actually put down money to invest in it. And we have the more painful approach, which is to reduce pumping, which is unfortunately what we're going to have to do quite a lot of. We reduce pumping by using more surface water, but often that's not available, and we'll be seeing quite a lot of land fallowing. We also have some water quality aspects of managing water, particularly for nitrate contamination. That another whole talk could be on that. Providing information and informative calculations and analysis is an important part of any water management, and particularly groundwater management, and providing incentives and enforcement to manage these systems well. Groundwater management, as I mentioned before, is going to become basin management, because our primary equation for groundwater use is the water use minus the surface water use. So that that mass balance leads us to manage all of these things together at a basin scale. Because groundwater has always made up the difference between surface water available and water demands, that's where really the major source of our groundwater overdraft in California. So we're going to have to increase our surface water supplies to the degree we can, and that's not always going to be possible. And we'll mostly have to be reducing water use. And so this is going to bring us basin water management. The approach that we've seen having quite a lot of success in California is what I would call portfolio system management, where we take quite a lot of water supply options, water supply elements in terms of different water sources, conveyance, storage, treatment, desalination, operational coordination, agreements. So integrated water supply system management and integrated water demand management from agriculture, cities, ecosystems, recreation, hydropower, all coming together. And because at a basin scale and a regional scale, these portfolios often involve many people, certainly the water users as well as the water utilities, and then the regional water managers and the larger scale reservoirs and dams. We need incentives to make all these individuals and all these organizations work well together. So we have pricing and markets and shaming and regulations and insurance and education, of course. So all these together are our water management portfolio, and this has been really the most successful approach that we've had in California of managing water scarcity. Because in a dry place like California, you can never eliminate all scarcity. But you can save a lot of money, and you can save a lot of pain and suffering and native species if you manage it well.
Jay, one more minute.
Okay, then I'll go really fast. We have a lot of different roles for state and basin authorities in all of this. We have some interesting technical issues of how do we estimate the amount of overdraft and what does that mean to do for how we manage those basins. Groundwater and basin management are really essential for these problems. We have in Chile, there'll be very high costs and geography that prevent connecting most of the basins in Chile like we are connected in California. You will always have some water scarcity. We have a saying in California that it's very rare that we have a shortage of water, but it's very common for us to have a shortage of cheap water. Well-balanced portfolio solutions tend to be much less expensive, more reliable, and more adaptable, particularly to climate change as we move forward. There's important roles for national, regional, local governments, and stakeholders to manage these problems together. And because I'm a professor, I'm going to leave you with some further readings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Sam, for speeding me up.
Sí. Bueno, a continuación,
Well, next,
como les decía, otro big hitter.
as I said, another big hitter we got, another excellent guest, Teferit Segai. He is national leader of Water Resources Program, which is part of the Office of the National Natural Resources Program, and Sustainable Agricultural Resources. Teferi works for the USDA, the Agricultural U.S. Department of the U.S., in ARS, in the Agricultural Research Department. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Teferi. You are recognized.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Mhm.
Okay, can I go ahead and start?
Yes,
Thank
please.
you. Thank you for inviting me to give a talk. It's
Sí, como siempre, cuando uno
As always, we're having some technological issues. Let's see if we can, if Teferi's connection comes back, because we're having some internet issues. If you could repeat, Teferi, again, please. We seem to have lost you a second. Testing, testing. It seems he was off the call. Yes. So then, as we wait for Teferi to come back, maybe let's ask questions for Jay in the meantime, right? Jay,
Okay.
so the experience from California drought is quite parallel to. There are two comments that are made. One is that it's not that there's a lack of water, there's no cheap water, as you said. And the other is that, well, in the equation that you showed us of use minus superficial water equal to subterranean water use, well, this has to do with agricultural development or the size of agricultural development. Maybe here, if you could comment, please, how, if we're, how big we are in agricultural aspects or frontiers, because what I said of the 200, 400,000 hectares that will have to be reduced and fallowed.
Similar to Chile, about 80% of California's water use, human water use, is for agriculture. About 20% of it is for cities of consumptive use. And so this is really a major problem for agriculture in these parts of the state. We have a tremendous growth in orchards and vine crops, so very capital intensive agriculture. And some of those will be reduced, although I suspect that most of the reduction we see in irrigated lands in order to eliminate groundwater overdraft will come from our lower value crops on the least productive soils. So we'll probably produce less cotton, less corn, less alfalfa, and try to keep as many of the more profitable crops that we export.
Hey,
Did
Jay,
that answer your question?
yeah, Jay. We have actually two comments from the audience. So I think the first one is in the mountainous areas, particularly on the Maipo Canyon, there is a U.S. transnational, AES, that is investing in groundwater use, and they use it illegally in some hydropowers. And I think in that one, I mean, we should condemn it. I mean, it's not that we are part of that transnational, but definitely it's not something that we agreed on. Let me, I will change to the Spanish. Les decía que en el área de, hay un
I
comentario en
was
el área.
saying there's a comment of mountainous area in Cajon del Maipo. There is a transnational called AIS that has invested in underground water, which are they incorporate into their electrical dam and electrical production, which I think is illegal. And transnationals do not represent the feeling of many of North American citizens of non-overdrafting. If it's condemnable, and also another comment from Victor Alvarez says, thanks, Jay. I have a question regarding management plans. He says, how bonding are the private decisions and the role that local agencies play in terms of administrating water better or better water management. Let me switch over to
So,
English a bit. He's going to
so
switch
Jay,
to English.
the question is how together are the decisions of private companies and the role of these local agencies, I mean, related to those private industries, but also to management and water allocation.
Well, in California, agriculture is by far the biggest industry that uses water. The private water users, the farmers, are often organized in irrigation districts, which are locally elected. So in Chile, it's very common for the water right holders to get together and have a private association of water right holders. In California and in the Western United States, the water users, the agricultural water users, are often organized into a local government, what we call a special district. And so they essentially elect their own government and have a branch of government locally which represents them. And that's been very effective for bringing their interests and cause to bear at the governmental level. And has given them quite a lot of influence in the operation of water at the regional scale.
And Jay, I think also we should add that in these groundwater sustainable agencies, there are people that are included by the law. So people that manage land and water,
right.
But also you can include other people like tribal nations, or you can, representatives of tribal nations, of farmers of the community.
So in principle, our groundwater law is going to allow involvement of quite a few different, a wide range of different interests in groundwater management and perhaps ultimately basin management. But the people that will be spending the most time on this issue will be the farmers. And so I expect that they're going to have a disproportionate impact on the operation of these groundwater basins over time. Although certainly many of the disadvantaged communities also are more represented now than they have been in the past. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I think you're touching two different groups that are heavily affected.
Right.
So farmers or the agricultural producers that, I mean, they've pushed a little bit hard the gas pedal. So we have in some places overdraft, not in all, and also disadvantaged communities. At this point, I mean, let me, from these first 3 years, now it's 2014, so now I think we have 5 years, almost 6 years of the implementation of Sigma. I mean, let me be very specific. So local organization or local mandate, what are the pros and cons? The same inclusion, are these agencies being well represented or not by their members? What you could have changed now in foresight?
Well, I think these are difficult issues. I think the new law is so much better than what we had before that I'm really happy about it, and I'm not particularly dissatisfied. It will take probably another decade or more, maybe 2 or 3 decades, to see how this all plays out. I'm hoping that it plays out so that we have more integrated regional and basin water management as a whole. But there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. There's going to be perhaps some changes, minor changes to the law, a lot of new agreements, a lot of new ways of thinking that have to be explored in order to make this all work. I'm just really happy that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it took us only 100 years.
Only 100 years, that's right. 100 years after we had surface water rights being formalized, we're starting to formalize groundwater management, but we're probably not going to formalize groundwater rights because that's too difficult.
So Jay, let me, I'll do this question. So Paulina Pino put a question on the chat. So good afternoon, everyone. I got a question for Jay. how it has evolved the water quality in the aquifers through the drought periods, and how are we considering or how we're managing this problem?
So we have two problems with drought and groundwater, particularly in rural areas. One is because the farmers are pumping additional groundwater during drought to make up for reductions in surface water availability, the groundwater table is lower, is brought down, and that often strands the shallower wells of domestic households out in the rural area and small communities, which tend to have shallower wells. So for those communities, they just lose water entirely quite often. The other impact that this has is as you lower the groundwater table, you induce a layer near the surface, closer to the surface, of nitrate contamination in the aquifer to move further down into the aquifer, so that even if your well doesn't go dry, you're accelerating the movement of nitrate contamination into your drinking water wells. And this is a problem for domestic wells as well as small rural communities. And so we have quite a lot of problems with that. And then if you go down deep enough to get below the nitrate contamination, sometimes you come into geologic areas where you have a natural contamination with arsenic. And so there's even a few places in California where they have more than one well, one shallower well that's contaminated by nitrate and a deeper well that's contaminated by arsenic, and they try to blend them so you stay within the limits of both. So the water quality aspects I think are going to become greater over time, certainly from the nitrate contamination.
So Jay, one other thing that I think it will be great for you to share. So you have sorry, I didn't want to bring you to the slides, but I think there is one that I really like it. So the one that you have the cumulative probability curves of what is that one. So okay, well, you put it in there. I'll just want to explain it on. Yes, please, and I'll go on the Spanish for a little bit.
Okay.
Miren, lo que va a presentar Jay es que hay
What
ciertas.
Jay presents is that there are certain aquifers that have been overexploited. Thus, what Jay will that we know have been exploited for 100 years. That was the joke. So, if we reduce a certain amount of use of subterranean water, what is the probability that it is the aquifer of the sustainable future that is will be used for recharge and extraction? You will realize here we've had to step on the
Go ahead,
accelerator.
Jay.
Please,
So you
Jay.
can see make sure I'm not muted.
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
So you can see on this, we have, this is the Central Valley of California, our biggest agricultural area and our biggest groundwater basin. In the northern part, we have much less overdraft. And so you can see, we have a probability distribution. So overdraft is actually a very hard number to estimate. You can tell if it's big or small, but it's hard to tell whether it's an exact number or not. So when we look at it probabilistically, we see that for these northern basins, the amount of reduction you'd have to make in groundwater pumping or in water use, it's fairly small, but you have to reduce your groundwater use more in order to have a higher probability of ending overdraft. So it's not like this is an exact science. When you move further south to the areas where the overdraft is quite a bit bigger, you can see these curves are shifting quite a bit to the right. But even here, for some of the basins, there's a pretty wide range of uncertainty about how much water use you're going to have to reduce in order to end overdraft by the year 2040. Now you can imagine this is quite natural that between today and the year 2040, we're not sure how many wet years we're going to have and how many dry years we're going to have. This alone, this hydrologic uncertainty, means we have some uncertainty as to how much water use we need to reduce. in order to end overdraft.
Yeah, and I think this really stressed out that, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of variability, and we try to do our best as scientists to inform decision makers. But yeah, definitely it is an art of what these also plans state, that it is every 5 years checking if things are going well, and then double checking those curves, how are we on those
Right.
targets.
So you really need to adaptively manage the groundwater over time, but it's going to be very difficult, because if you want to increase your land fallowing in order to have a higher probability of ending overdraft, that means you're going to have to fallow more and more valuable land. The first land that you fallow is pretty cheap. It's the least productive land, growing the least profitable crops. But when you move out here to the end to improve your probability of ending overdraft by a small bit, that can become very expensive land to fallow.
Yeah, and that one also associated with what the minister Maria Emilia was mentioning, which is that each of those lands fallow, it represents in maybe either from a bigger agriculture to a family farm.
Oh yeah.
And in that one, it is consider also the social economic well-being of rural communities. So we are getting, Jay, before actually wrapping up this, yeah, it's been a pleasure talking with you, sharing this one. It's always fun to have these discussions together. I'll wrap it up the event, but thanks a lot, Jay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Ahorita es bueno, muchas gracias como siempre.
Well, thank you as always. It's when you trust in technology. Technology gives us some issues. In this case, it was with Tiviti. We will have an opportunity to share with him again, but now leave you with Jay and thank him now. I leave you with Pablo. I think we had some questions to go from Javier Cortés and Javier Amaruz, so we will answer them through the chat box. Thank you very much. And here we continue on with Pablo. Thank you, Stan and Jay, for this presentation. And as pointed out, unfortunately, we had an issue with Tifedi and we weren't possible to reconnect him. So we have an interesting round scene between Jay and conversations between Jay and Sam regarding subterranean water management transferred to local realities in Chile. So with this, we will close our first panel out. Thank you very much for your interventions, and we hope to receive you and receive Tefedi on a future occasion. And we thank everyone for the support with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Summit. We will give some brief minutes and continue with our second panel. So I leave you all invited to prepare your questions and maybe a little coffee, a short break, and we will connect in 2 more minutes. Pablo, yes? And to tell the audience, also 4 big hitters will come, 4 superstars, Jose Luis Arumi, Steven Springhorn, Monica Rodriguez. So please go prepare the coffee and cookies that good things are coming. So an interesting conversation between the four, moderated by Jose. So we will going live. Thank you very much and welcome back to our second panel that we mentioned before the cuts, the participation of interesting researchers from California and also representatives from Chile. I leave you now on this opportunity with Jose Luis Arumi, main researcher of the FUNDAP's Water Resources of the Agricultural Engineering School of the University of Concepcion, and also a member of Water Technical Consortium, whom on this opportunity will moderate this station panel. So thank you very much for participating, and thank you very much for your intervention and moderation of the panel. Thank you, Pablo. Well, continuing with the activities, we will spend the second panel, where we will have three important guests. In first place, we have a friend of time, Professor Graham Fogg, Emeritus Professor and of the Department of Soil, Air, and Water Resources of University of California, Davis. And we also have Stephen Springhorn, the director of the program of Sustainable Resource Management of Subterranean Water and Water Resources of Use of the California Department. And Monica Rodriguez Bueno, Chief of Department of Studies of Development and Policy of the National Irrigation Committee. Each of these speakers will give a brief presentation of their background and ideas, considering a maximum of 5 minutes each. So to start, I leave you with Graham first.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. It's a great pleasure to be here. When I saw the invitation, I was delighted at being able to be back with my Chilean colleagues and others. I wish it could be in person, but this is still very nice. I appreciate it very much. Yes, I'm a professor of hydrogeology, groundwater science, and have been at that for, I guess, over 42 years. And I'm just going to give an overview on what I consider to be global problems of groundwater, or problems that we see pretty much everywhere. And I see, groundwater is like the dark matter of hydrology. Most of the freshwater hydrologic mass is in groundwater, but it's all invisible. So it's like the dark matter. 97% of liquid fresh water on Earth is in groundwater. So it's our biggest reservoir. It's also the biggest reservoir where we can store additional water. For example, in California, we have 3 times as much space in our Central Valley for storing additional groundwater as the total storage in all the surface reservoirs in the state. So groundwater is the biggest reservoir. It's the biggest opportunity for storing water for water security. But in essentially worldwide, groundwater is widely mismanaged. Why does everyone struggle with managing groundwater? Well, a key reason is that it's invisible. It's not transparent. And lately I've been talking about Groundwater 2.0, a set of concepts for transitioning groundwater management and transparency from the 1950s and 60s and 70s thinking to modern thinking. And I think we are at a moment in water resources and groundwater science where there is the potential to transition into a groundwater 2.0, where we are doing things much better, and we're conquering a lot of our struggles worldwide in managing groundwater. Stephen Springhorn, who speaks next, and I assume he'll talk about California's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's an important step in this whole process, but I think it's going to get bigger than that. A lot of what I talk about these days is how to make groundwater more transparent groundwater is very much a data science, even more so than surface water. All of hydrology is a data science. It's dependent on data, but in groundwater, it's even more dependent on data. And key data are the characteristics of the reservoir. A lot of that is the geology. In Chile, for example, it would be helpful if you were doing in your Central Valley the kind of geologic characterization that is being done in the northern mineral extraction industries. That's the kind of characterization that really is needed in aquifer systems, and that's very important to do and to develop the data on what is that groundwater reservoir. The other key parts of it are the major flows, the major fluxes. And California and Chile are both heavily agricultural states, so most of the groundwater is used for agriculture. So in those circumstances, the big flows, the big fluxes, are pumpage, largely for irrigation, but not entirely, and recharge. And most of the recharge in these places comes from agriculture, from irrigation. So these two big fluxes, if you can't get a handle on them, it's a problem, right? You can't define the water budget if you don't adequately define the two big fluxes, and they are a challenge. Pumping is often not measured. Recharge is essentially unobservable. So how do you characterize those two big fluxes to characterize groundwater? Well, a key for agricultural systems actually is knowing the crop water use, knowing the consumptive use of the crops. If you know that, there are ways to define and contain and constrain the groundwater budget. It's very important. And if you can meter the pumping, that's also key. And again, all this comes back to data. You take that data, you can build models with it, and between the data and real-time monitoring and modeling, that's what makes the groundwater systems transparent enough that they are more manageable. I've probably close to my 5 minutes or have exceeded it, so I will end there and look forward to the discussion portion.
Ok, muchas gracias, Graham. Voy a dejar con ustedes
Thank you,
a
Graham. Now we leave you with Stephen Springhorn, whom will share with us.
Stephen.
Stephen?
Well, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with you all today and with this esteemed panel and on this topic of sharing information across between our countries on groundwater, which, as Graham and others have talked about, is a critical resource for us here in California and across the globe. Again, my name is Stephen Springhorn, and I'm a program manager within our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office in the California Department of Water Resources. And as this slide shows, we're experiencing drought conditions in California currently. And really, we have had drought conditions for an extended period of time over the last decade or so, with some periodic wet years in between. But with climate change, we do know that we're expecting more intense droughts, and we need to be planning for those. And in times, as we all know, of shortage of surface water, we turn to groundwater to make up the difference. And so that's why, as Graham mentioned, groundwater management is so critical for the state of California. And I'll be providing a quick overview of where we stand and where we're headed with California's groundwater management. Quickly wanted to highlight what we do at the Department of Water Resources. We manage the state's water project, which takes a lot of the natural precipitation and runoff that happens in the northern part of California and distributes that through a very complex and sophisticated infrastructure to areas of the state where most people live. And there's a whole bunch of other activities that our department does, and one is sustainability, as I'll talk about. So current update on sustainable groundwater management in California. Professor Jay Lund covered a lot of these slides, so I'll go over quickly, but just wanted to build on those that California is the largest water user in the United States of America. We're also the 5th largest economy in the world. However, we're the last Western state in the United States to regulate in a comprehensive way groundwater. So we do have a lot of catching up to do. We're 7 years into implementing this landmark law, which is called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA for short. And so that's where it's exciting to be able to share information, but also learn from our colleagues in Chile and other areas of how to best manage groundwater. As mentioned previously, groundwater is very important in normal years. It makes up of 40% of the state's water supply, but in drought years, it makes up 60% of the state's entire water supply. And roughly 33 million Californians rely on groundwater for some portion of their water supply. And during droughts, it's such an important buffer to help us withstand the droughts and manage them. And you can see from the picture on the left, we have a very similar Central Valley as Chile, with many billions of dollars of agricultural output, sensitive environmental ecosystems, and groundwater is central to a lot of those, and then urban areas as well. This was mentioned by Professor Jay Lund, but just highlighting the groundwater basins that work in concert with the built infrastructure of California. These 515 groundwater basins are our natural infrastructure that hold an order of magnitude more groundwater or storage capacity, as mentioned previously, from the snowpack in our Sierra Nevada mountains to the reservoirs that capture and distribute that runoff. And we have a substantial groundwater storage capacity that Graham mentioned, that really it's early days of trying to have widespread recharge activities occurring in our state. A quick look at the governance structure. Within the United States of America, we have multiple federal agencies working in groundwater. Within the state of California, we have multiple state agencies. And then at the local level, we have hundreds of local agencies and almost 300 new what are called groundwater sustainability agencies that have the express powers and authorities to implement this new groundwater law in California. So what this shows is there's a very complex governance structure, which adds complexity, but also adds opportunity to pool resources and assets to tackle these challenging resource management issues such as groundwater management and water management. So quickly wanted to highlight what happened in California before the sustainable groundwater management and what is happening now. And it was a paradigm shift in how groundwater was managed. And you can see from the different droughts and floods throughout California's history, pieces of legislation have been passed mostly in times of drought, when there's been very big impacts and a lot of use of groundwater. That's when activity has happened in the state of California in a general sense. And before SGMA was passed, it was voluntary groundwater management. It was management in smaller areas with variable levels of implementation. So not everyone planned for groundwater management, not everyone carried it out, and there wasn't any requirement to have groundwater management. That all changed after the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act passed. So now there's required groundwater management. It's looking at entire groundwater basins. There's required implementation and performance tracking. And if the local agencies do not succeed, the state, as Professor Jay Lund mentioned, can come in and make sure that the local agencies are managing accordingly to the new law. So a lot has changed. So I'll just breeze through this, but the orange and yellow on these maps and the hatch pattern show where the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is really being implemented in the state of California. And that represents on the order of 90% of all the groundwater that's pumped in California are in these orange and yellow basins. So just quickly in closing, there's a couple very important steps that we've been through and that we're continuing on in Sigma implementation is that the formation of these local groundwater agencies that were over 260 of them formed by 2017. They all were required to form groundwater sustainability plans to determine what sustainability is for all of these groundwater basins. And there have been about 50 submitted so far and being implemented. And there's another 70 coming in the next month. And so that will complete all of those required basins that have to do sustainable groundwater management. They will be submitted and be implemented within a month. And again, that's a huge milestone, and a lot of work has gone into that at both the state and mostly the local level within all of these areas in California. And then the hard work begins of implementing those plans to reach sustainability within 20 years. And that's going to be going through an adaptive management process because there's a lot of gaps that remain that Graham highlighted that we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's a lot of data that still needs to be collected that needs to be used to inform implementation at the local and state level to reach sustainability, which we all know is very important. So we have a resilient California moving forward. And so with that, I'll stop there and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Steven.
Thank you very
Finalmente,
much, Stephen. And finally, I leave you with Mrs. Monica Rodriguez to give us her part of the presentation. Very much, Jose Luis, greeting everyone whom joins us on the seminar today and thank the invitation from University of California, Davis, for joining us today. First of all, I want to tell you that I am the Chief of Research and Policy Development of the National Irrigation Committee. I've been 10 years here. Thus, I've been able to see in the last 10 years what it is to face a drought that our country has been almost 13 facing. As our Minister of Agriculture has been at the beginning, I want to share brief slides to show what the National Irrigation Committee has done in regards to subterranean water use. First, to say that the National Irrigation Committee is an institution made up by a council of ministers. And I want to note this because even though irrigation is a niche activity that affects agriculture, the fact of being able to work with different ministries, with public works, of social development, agenda, and economy allow us to be an institution to coordinate these things better. Agriculture is the main consumer of water, and thus everything that can be done to support farmers and the organizations of water users that manage water in our is to be able to face water availability facing water change, climate change. Now, the National Irrigation Committee has as a main goal to plan irrigation and stimulate and join farmers into improving their irrigation through financing or civil works and technification works. That's our main aspect. However, we have something to share regarding subterranean water management. And in this sense, as I've said, are my slides about. I'd like to explain of how we are able to contribute here. But first to say what are the lines of work from the National Irrigation Committee. We have on one hand investment, we plan. We have a planning role done through studies, projects, and programs, which on one hand generates information for future irrigation works with the goal of the increasing of water availability and also to work with water users organizations, which are those water use in the country, and to be able to do more efficient management. This is on one hand the line of work with investments. We also have also relation where we finance technification and irrigation works, or works that are used in unconventional renewable energies, civil works, quality improvement. We also have management concepts through telemetry and automation of civil works for the programming of irrigation. And finally, infiltration. Thus, we've given resources to be able to support infiltration. Thus, I mentioned two lines of work because in both we've tried to develop a plan, subterranean management, water management, and to intensify or increase its correct management use. Thus, as I said in the beginning, 13 years of drought has made it for us to try to help farmers and to look for the country to make more water available for agricultural use. And it is in this sense that the policies managed during the years talk of larger works being built like dams that take longer term to achieve its execution and construction. Additionally, it is great investment for the government, and thus we've looked for works that are able to be quickly performed with less resources, and in this sense, the aquifer recharge, the managed recharge of the water table is quite interesting. That's why the Council of Ministers sends us to make a national plan for aquifer recharge management plan, and thus this mandate is taken and a plan is created where I will indicate the areas that we work as a National Irrigation Committee. First, we have a methodological guideline. This guideline for aquifer recharge done with other international students, and UC Davies participated in the methodological guide. And the idea is to make a guideline, repeating the words, to show what are the steps and what are the most basic aspects to be considered so that the same user organizations and farmers can manage and create their own recharge project. First, what were the aspects to select the most adequate project for aquifer recharge and also to make decisions for this project's implementation. This guideline is available since July 2020 on our website, and we have to do diffusion work so that farmers are able to learn of the methods, select from them, and are able to manage with the project that most adjusts to their need. On the other hand, with the goal of being able of increasing our knowledge regarding on construction and operation of aquifer recharge, we did a pilot program in the O'Higgins region of our country, something with a more agricultural orientation. We were at the Cachapoal Basin and we were able to build two infiltration pools of 1,000. Said this is a pilot program and we were able to achieve estimated recharge of 77 days recharge during the winter season, and we're able to recharge 270 meters approximately. This is as similar to dams, five small dams. Thus, of the experience, we can learn of the construction and selecting the most adequate sites. What were the most adequate infiltration tests? How to treat the water that was to be collected. Thus, there's a lot of information that we have made available and also hope to be able to spread. On the other hand, we believe that any works done must be joined in hand by strengthening whom will manage it in our country and in the water user organizations, and specifically these subterranean water communities. We only have 17 of the subterranean water groups constituted in the country. We're working to continue in this session to be able to help with management and organization, and to at the same time be able to start with their recharge projects. And on the other hand, information collection. There are several studies that we are doing that allow other recharge techniques, other types of projects like underground reservoirs or channel management. And here, there's a lot still to be done. So these are the large areas of our plan, and I won't extend myself more because I think we're almost at 5 minutes. And I just wish to finish by saying that the National Irrigation Committee is an institution that offers its services to agricultural farmers. And today we see that subterranean water management is something that could help farmers increase availability. And thus, we are doing all possible to propose and present the subject to public knowledge and present the tools to farmers to advance along the line.
Ok, Mónica, muchas gracias. Vamos a entrar
Thank you,
ahora a
Monica.
la
Thank you
sesión
very
de
much.
preguntas
We are going to
y
our
respuestas
question and answer
del
round,
público. Hay, los
and
invito
our
a la
questions
gente que
from
está
the
viendo
audience. We
se
invite
puede enviar
everyone
las
who
preguntas a
is
través del
looking to give
chat.
their questions through the chat function.
Tengo aquí una primera
I have
pregunta
here a first
que va
question,
dirigida
which is
a
for
Mónica
Monica
y que se refiere a lo siguiente.
and refers to
Existe
the following. Are,
la percepción
there is a
de
perception
que hay una
that there
cierta,
is a series,
se ha favorecido a las
well,
grandes
we've
plantaciones
been
de
favoring
uso del
larger
agua. De hecho, se llama,
plantations in water
aquí la
use.
pregunta se refiere
Something
a
here, the
carteles del
question
agua.
refers to the water
Eh,
cartels
y
practically.
eso se ha llevado
And
también
this
o ha
has also
derivado
been
en un
brought
proyecto
and
de ley que habla sobre
to
la
a bill of
accesibilidad del
law that
agua subterránea
talks
y
of
en la
the availability
actualización
of
de la reforma de la ley de
subterranean water
riego.
and
Entonces,
a reform of the
quizás sería
irrigation law.
interesante,
So
Mónica, saber
it would be
tú,
interesting, Monica,
como tú
to
trabajas en
know,
la Dirección de
since
Estudios
you work
Externos,
in the Department of
no sé
Studies,
si puedes responder algo,
if
pero
you could
¿cómo
answer
es
something. But
cuál es la visión de la
what
Comisión Nacional
is
de Riego en
the
torno
vision of the
al uso
National
del agua por
Irrigation
parte de la
Committee
agricultura?
regarding water
Principalmente me refiero al tema de los subsidios a los grandes
to
agricultores.
the subsidiaries given to the farmers? Yes, well, in Chile, farmers and any user asks requests for water use rights. And here we have a lot to talk about where each user uses the amount of water that has been authorized or the amount of water that they are able to use according to the user's organization rules. We know that it is quite scarce and one has a right to use. Now, regarding the large companies or water uses of the large companies, I wish to say that through our stimulation law contest, you mentioned I was in the divisions, in the studies division, and the stimulation law is a long line, a good line of work that makes available resources so that farmers, through consultants, are able to design projects and apply them. And the projects that win are the projects that are built. This is a contestable fund that depends on the characteristics of the producer. There are large company contests, there are small producer funds, but the large company funds would correspond to a lower percentage of the available resources in this election law. The majority of resources, I don't have the data on hand, are usually taken by mid to small businesses and small producers, farmers. This is what I could share initially from the irrigation committee, Jose
Muchas
Luis.
gracias.
Thank you very
Hay un
much.
par de preguntas más que pueden
There are
surgir aquí,
several other
pero voy
questions that may
a
be made for you, but
avanzar con los colegas
I will try
de
to
California.
advance with our
Tengo una
UC
primera
Davis colleagues.
pregunta
I have a
para
first
Graham
question for Graham,
eh, y se refiere
and it refers
a
specifically
que
to
en este minuto en Chile
that at this minute in Chile, we are discussing a new constitution. In this sense, there are several points of view from a minimalistic point of view for constitution towards a constitution that details absolutely all aspects that can be imagined. So in this sense, Graham, making use of your experience, please comment on how has the understanding of subterranean water use changed in the last 30 years?
Oh, yeah, that could take a while to answer that question.
I know.
But I would say, you know, um, when we invented the ability to drill deep wells, and also around the midpoint of the last century, we developed the ability and the power source to pump a lot of water. Once that happened, we became very efficient at extracting groundwater. So, from my perspective, during the first 3, 4, or 5 decades of modern groundwater development, so mostly in the last century, we just pumped and pumped, and we were very good at that. It's simple. All it takes is money and power and money. So sometimes I suggest, well, what would have happened had we put as much effort into recharging groundwater as we did into pumping. And maybe you could measure those efforts in watts, for example. So I think maybe the biggest change that is happening now is the realization that we can't just keep withdrawing from the bank accounts. We can't just keep withdrawing from the aquifers without putting in some effort to put water back. The other thing that's changing is the transparency, or our ability to make the groundwater systems transparent. I think wireless sensor networks that can give you real-time information on the state of the groundwater system is still not used enough, but the technology is there. So what I see hopefully happening and accelerating now and in the future is more real-time knowledge of the state of the groundwater systems, so that people can react and understand the consequences of what they're doing, whether those consequences are because of pumping or because of recharge. So, and I think the other big thing that's changing that's related to that is the realization globally that a lot of our major groundwater reservoirs are getting severely overdrafted. And there are significant negative consequences of that, including less base flow, less spring flow, and effects on groundwater dependent ecosystems of all kinds. So those realizations are motivating people to try and better manage the groundwater and surface water together. But we're still not very good at it. We're really just babies heading down this road. It's a very interesting time, but I think it's just the beginning of what should happen.
Muchas gracias, Graham. Continuando con
Thank you,
esa pregunta,
Graham. Continuing with that question, I have a similar
se
question
relaciona con la última
that is
pregunta
related to the
en el
last part
sentido
of what
de
Graham said, in a
cómo
sense of how.
es una pregunta quizás doble.
It's a
¿Cómo
question, probably a double question.
en la ley
How,
de
in
sustentabilidad de aguas
this
subterráneas, en primer lugar,
subterranean
cómo se mide
sustainability
la
management act, how
sustentabilidad
do you
en el
define
crecimiento que
sustainability?
hay acá en Chile?
Because
¿Cómo
that's
se
an
aplica en una región tan compleja y diversa
apply
como
it to
California?
such a complex region like California.
And is that a question for Stephen or for me?
It's a question for Stephen. Yes.
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, and the way that sustainability is defined, and you alluded to the complexity of California, and it's very similar, I imagine, to Chile, that there's high variability from one basin to the next, and no one basin is the same with its water supply, its hydrogeology, or its basin users, or the community, or the people, or the ecosystems that depend on it. And so that has translated into the law that we have in California. There's a lot of local control and local flexibility in that decision making of how sustainability is defined. And there's some positives of that, and we've seen some challenges of that as we could get into if we want to. But overall, to your question, how sustainability is defined, it's by 6 key performance metrics. They're lowering groundwater levels, changing groundwater storage, land subsidence, seawater intrusion, water quality, and depletions of interconnected surface water. So those 6 factors are what a lot of energy in data collection, understanding, analysis has gone into in California in the last 7 years. And these will be the key performance metrics that the state will be monitoring and tracking performance to make sure that there aren't undesirable results that occur in any one of these 6 categories. Now, as Graham mentioned before, there are a lot of data gaps that still remain on each one of those 6 factors. And so that's where, under this new law in California on groundwater, is there's an adaptive management structure where the first plans are due to chart the course of where these basins are going to go to reach sustainability within 20 years. But there's annual check-ins, there's annual reports that are required to see how the progress is going, and then 5-year check-ins where if the locals aren't succeeding or are not willing to continue monitoring, that's where the state could come in and assist or work with those local agencies to get them back on track. All the while, the state of California is investing tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to give out in grant funds to these local agencies to generate data sets and tools to put in the hands of these local managers to make sure that they're successful. So that's sort of the overall structure of Sigma. It's definitely still a work in progress and baby steps, as Graham mentioned, but there's been a lot of progress to date. And it's really served us well because Sigma was born out of the last drought that we had in 2012 to 2016. And we're much better off now in this current drought than we would have been if we did nothing in California back in the last drought. So there's still much more to do, but there has been early progress made and a lot of work put in. And we have a lot more data available to us now on what are the current groundwater conditions in the state, but we're going to still work towards getting a lot better understanding moving forward.
Muchas gracias, Steven. Lamentablemente,
Thank you, Stephen. But unfortunately, we have to close the panel. I've gotten a notification internally that we have to close the panel, and there are still, unfortunately, several questions to go that we will have to send an answer to through email. But for now, we have to close, unfortunately. So thank you very much, Monica, Graham, Stephen, for your presentation. It has been a very interesting one, and I hope that we can see each other ideally in presence in another opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, José Luis, y Graham, Steven, Mónica. Muchas gracias por su presentación y por sus intervenciones.
Thank you, Jose Luis, Graham, Stephen, Monica. We will recontinue one of the points that I think was still pending from the first panel. We were able to reestablish connection with Teferi, whom unfortunately fell in the first panel. So we will try to continue now with a very brief break, very brief, just to switch panel and we will continue in 2 minutes with Teferi's presentation and closing seminar event of the Sustainable Water. So we will give you some minutes. One live. Well, welcome back, everyone. And as mentioned before the break, we were able to reestablish communication with Teferi, whom unfortunately had lost connection in the first panel, a technological issue that we have to deal with these seminars. However, thank you, Teferi, for joining us and reconnecting once again with us. And as we pointed out in the beginning, Teferi Tsegaye is the national leader of the Natural Basin Management Program, which is part of the national program of water resources and sustainable agricultural systems, and of the Sustainable Water Initiative and of the USDA. So, first of all, thank you very much, Teferi, for participating in this great event. And we especially appreciate your reconnection and the opportunity to listen to your presentation regarding subterranean water use in the United States from a agricultural point of view. So I leave you with Teferi now, if you may.
Thank you so much. I will start my presentation. My name is Teferi Sagaye. I'm the National Program Leader for Water Resources. I also lead for the Conservation Effects Assessment Project and the Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Networks. Okay, my presentation will focus on overview of the Agricultural Research Service, water availability and watershed management. I'll highlight that, and the Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network, I will highlight about that also. And finally, I will close with the ARS Conservation Effects Assessment Project, which is SIP. So ARS is the in-house research arm of USDA. And ARS finds solutions to agricultural problems from field to table. We have about 15 national programs and 690 research projects. Currently, we have over 2,000 scientists and postdocs, 6,000 other employees, 90 plus research locations, including overseas laboratories. Our budget is approximately 1.4 billion for fiscal year budget. So the mission of ARS is to conduct research to ensure high quality, safe food and other products, assess the nutritional needs of Americans, sustain a competitive agricultural economy, enhance the natural resource base and the environment, and provide economic opportunities to rural citizens and societies as a whole. So we have, within ARS, we have 5 locations across the US, the Northeast area, the Southeast area, the Midwest area, the Pacific West area, and the Plains area. We have 5 area offices. And that, as you can see, we have also offices internationally in a few countries. So we have 4 national programs under the Office of National Program within ARS. The first national program is Nutrition, Food Safety and Quality. Second one is Animal Production and Protection. The third one is Crop Production and Protection. And the fourth one is Natural Resources and Sustainable Agricultural Systems. We are within a natural resource and sustainable agricultural systems. So the national program, the leaders mainly coordinate, communicate, and empower research, that ARS is conducting. We have, as I mentioned, we have over 690 research projects carried out by ARS. So we have within natural resource and sustainable systems, we have 4 national programs. The first one, water availability and watershed management. The second one is soil and air. The third one is pasture, forage, and rangeland systems. And the fourth one is agricultural systems, competitive and sustainability, NP216. We have approximately about 423 scientists and 123 research projects and 59 locations that were across the US. So the water availability and watershed management, NP211, are our vision and mission and goal. Our vision is integrated, effective, and safe water resource management. And I'm not going to read that, but the goal is effectively and safely manage water resource while protecting the environment, human and animal health. So currently, the water availability and watershed management current program, we have a new action plan which is going to be implemented at the end of this year. And then we have 36 ARS-led projects, 299 cooperative research projects. Our budget is approximately 62 million. We have 126 full-time scientists, and we are covering 26 locations. Here are the locations with the projects. So as you can see, it is scattered all over the US. So we have 4 program components under this water availability and watershed management, and a number of problem statement areas. The first one is effective water management in agriculture. We are focusing on that, on water management. And then the second one, the component is erosion, sedimentation, and water quality protection. The third one is conservation practices in agricultural watersheds. And the fourth one is watershed management to improve agroecosystem services. Here in the fourth one, we are looking at systems approach, basically. And then on the second one, on the component, that's where the SEEP, which is a conservation effects assessment project, is falling. So I'm going to highlight about the long-term agroecosystem research network, which is called LTAR. This is designed for 30 plus years research, for the US and within ARS. So LTAR is a research network, and the purpose is to assess and enable sustainable working lands. And the mission is basically enable understanding and forecasting of regional landscape capacities to provide agricultural commodities and ecosystem services using, under changing conditions. So our vision is basically stated there. So the question that we are trying to address under LTAR is how do we sustain, or enhance productivity, profitability, and ecosystem services in US agroecosystems and agricultural landscapes. This is our main question for LTAR. So we are currently have 18 sites, soon to be 19, so we are across the US, and we have data records from 12 to 100 years, and area covered is as small as 0.57 square kilometer to 6,200 in Iowa. We have also co-located with other networks like NEON, as I'm sure you are familiar with that, National Ecological Observatory Network. We are co-located with NEON on 11 out of 17 locations. And also we are focusing on major drainage basins in the lower 48 states. Here are the 18 LTAR locations. We are looking into croplands, grazing lands, and integrated systems. We are also hosting the sites, the sites that are hosting ARS research, are on LTARs. As a matter of fact, we are partnered with universities. For example, the Archibald Biological Station and University of Florida, Michigan State University, and University of Nebraska. These 3 institutions are also hosting the LTAR, in addition to other ARS locations. So here are the LTAR locations, and we are also, like I said, co-located with NEON, NSF CZO, which is a Critical Zone Observatory Network, and then the NSF Long-Term Ecological Research Network, which is LTER. Again, here are the network, we are LTAR network, and we have site leads and leaders. So I am the lead, I'm located in Beltsville, and here are the national, leaders for the LTAR, location. So we are focused on, a shared research strategy, mainly G by E by M by P. We look at genetics, environment, management, as well as post-processing, and looking at also socio-economic aspect of the production system. So the organization, we have a national program, which is located in Beltsville, and we have also field leadership team. And then we have information management, a common experiment, which is cropping, rangeland, and integrated systems. And then we have common measurements, several measurements. Currently, we have about 22 working group under LTAR. So we look at metrology, CO2 flux, modeling, economics and social aspect of it, wind erosion, hydrology, biology, and things like that. So the LTAR shared research strategy, there are 4 priority areas of concern. The first is agroecosystem productivity. Second, climate variability and change. The third is conservation and environmental quality. The fourth one is socioeconomic viability and opportunities. We have 4 key products from LTAR, which is new knowledge of processes and systems, new technologies and management practices, improved agroecological models, and fourth one is comprehensive accessible data for public use. The LTAR involvement and productivity this past year, we have 468 people on base camp. So you can see the number of people is huge participating under LTAR. We published over 191 peer-reviewed publications this year only. And we LTAR leveraged support from 56 extramural grants and 21 partner projects. And also sites applied for 12 additional grants to support LTAR research. As I say, each location receive annually approximately $1 million annually. This is appropriation from Congress. In addition to that, we also solicit to secure additional funding for the sites. So these are the publications generated by LTAR. As you can see, we publish on water quality, phenology, grazing lands, remote sensing, human dimension, and so on. So we cover all aspects of, research, under each working group. We partner with a number of universities and colleges. As you can see, we partner with 60 colleges and universities, 15 US government agencies, 12 state government agencies, and we established 11, with research networks, and with 25 non-governmental organizations, 19 private industries or associated organizations, and also we partner with 29 international collaborators. So I'm going to switch, my talk now on the ARS Conservation Effects Assessment Project. Again, SEEP. SEEP, the main scope is it involves more than 60 ARS scientists, plus additional technical support staff, working in 18 benchmark watersheds at 18 ARS locations. The goal of the SEEP project is to quantify and establish the scientific understanding of the effects of conservation practices at the watershed scale, and estimate also conservation effects and benefits at regional and national scales. The ARS watershed assessment study, the objectives is: one is to develop and implement a data system. Second, to measure effects of conservation practices at the watershed scale. And third is to validate models and quantify uncertainty of model predictions. And the fourth one is develop policy planning tools to optimize profits and program efficiencies. And finally, the final objective is develop regional and watershed scale models. So here are the watershed studies locations across the US. As I said, there are 18 of them. So the SEEP watershed studies focus mainly on field level effects and also on off-site effects, and then the human dimensions aspect. So we look at adoption, economics, and other aspects. In summary, the SIP covers 18 watersheds with significant geographic extent across the US and important linkage to other networks and programs. SIP also is about documenting the effects of conservation practices on this watershed. We use the information from SIP to enhance the effects of conservation on the landscape, and also SIP serves as a research platform to help solve future problems for US agriculture. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, it is an integrated research approach, and it's an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research covering in both LTAR and the SIP watershed study. The water resource research, as I mentioned earlier, it is, every 5 years, we, develop new action plans. So we are currently implementing the new action plan for 2021 to 2025. With that, I will conclude my presentation, and if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer. And this is my contact if you need to have further discussion on these topics. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Teferi, por tu presentación.
Thank you, Teferi, for your presentation, given a very interesting work done at state level in the United States regarding research and lines related to agriculture, conservation, and managing natural resources and associated water. If there are questions from the audience, but I also wish to make use of the instance to comment. There are two things that seem very interesting for me regarding local reality. One is the budget. I believe that any Latin American nation in development would like a budget of the size for research, which seems very interesting. But additionally, the vision that you have in LTAR of projecting research towards 30 years. And it is in this sense that I would like if you could comment a bit of how to define the research lines at 30 years with such a far horizon to per se, and how that process is in decision making of what we want to evaluate from here to 30 years at the different centers and locations all over the US.
Thank you. As I mentioned, now we get that the funding is appropriation, congressional appropriation. Every year we get the budget. But when we do implement this research, we have two focus area on, for example, if it is a croplands, we have the business as usual, which is a current, what we have, the current technology versus aspirational one, which is adding new technology to existing, activity. So we compare those two, the business as usual versus aspirational one. So if after 5 years, what we implement is aspirational one will be the business as usual. So every time we have to advance new technologies, we have to implement new technologies to the research and demonstrate that to our stakeholders. So that's how we do the research. So we have, like I mentioned, we have 3 systems that we are looking into: the cropping system, grazing lands, and integrated systems. So for each one of them, we have the business as usual versus aspirational one. So on all these 18 locations, we have those implemented. The experiment is running as we speak. So we do also look at, compare, regional aspect of it, okay? And then we can scale also and, look at continental level, make through some modeling effort. So anything we do, it is coordinated. The research is coordinated by, the site leads. And there is, like I said, we have almost 21 working group, and each working group coordinated by a leader. For example, if someone is running hydrology related work, there is a hydrology group. If there is a greenhouse gas emission, CO2 and other, methane and other, there is that working group, and they coordinate and determine what is happening due to this business as usual versus aspirational one. So they compare those two and make some decision.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Respecto
Perfect.
al,
Thank you very much. Now, regarding these research lines, with all of the knowledge that is generated, technology, data, models, with public policies, and what is the influence that all of this research has in the design of public policies at federal level and local level, and also at different state level, natural resource management.
Well, as I mentioned from the beginning, ARS is a research, agency. We just do the science and provide our findings from the science. We don't get into policy and decision making on that. What we do, we provide that information to other agency. They take our information, our findings, and they will make that decision on policy. So we don't get into policy. So we just do research and provide research findings. That's all. That's what we do. We don't get into policy and decision making.
perfecto. Aporta la información dura para
Perfect.
otros tomadores.
Add with hard information for other decision makers and policy makers. Perfect. And we also want to thank you, Teferi, for your presentation and for giving us the time to reconnect. Even though we had some technical issues, we specifically thank you for your willingness, availability, and the completeness of your presentation for that. And with this, we also wish to close our event and seminar to thank all of our speakers who participated, moderators, Samuel, and all of our different panelists during the day for taking the time of your busy schedules and joining us in the discussion of such an important issue of water management and subterranean water management. And we also thank your support and to our participants for your interest, for connecting to the end at the Sustainable Groundwater Management Summit, thanking our partners, Captaidro, and different organizations that have supported us with development of the event, to the Embassy of the US, the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Syndicate Association of Irrigation and Drainage, Technological Consortium for Water, Chile, Lagos Limpio, the Ministry of Public Works, the General Water Works, the Ministry of Culture, the National Irrigation Committee, Corfo, and the National Research ANI. And also to thank our digital partners, Centrum Eventos, Conventions, and thank you very much for participating, everyone, and we hope to find each other following event very soon. So thank you very much, and we will all be